Thanks for putting me on the spot there, Jason. You know, as a recovering ecologist who finds myself sometimes being a human geographer, but working a lot with modelers, metrics are really important. Metrics sort of give us the targets that we're aiming towards, right? When we look at Sustainable Development Goals, you know, sort of the plethora of targets that we have sort of underneath that are extremely important for us to actually measure progress. Are we going in the right direction? Are we not? And so this is a really important conversation. We tend to also only navigate towards the things we can actually start to measure, that we have metrics for, which is another big gap in the way that we actually sort of organize ourselves. And so I think there's, you know, what Jason was saying is important, is that they can never be sort of one single metric that we're aiming towards. I think that is something really important to say. I think we also need to recognize the difficulty of getting a metric or a target that is as all-encompassing as we'd really like it to be. So sort of Jason is referring to kind of sort of Kate Raworth's donut, right? Sort of like navigating within sort of the safe sort of planetary boundaries, the safe space, but also sort of the just space of also being able to meet human needs. And we're sort of I'm currently sitting on working group for the transformations group of the Earth Commission, where sort of we've been tasked to come up with, at the planetary level, some of what these just and safe targets might actually look like. And when you actually get down to the nitty gritty, it's a lot more confusing. So take the food system, for example. We can talk about the need for a certain level of productivity, of the amount of calories that we can produce globally, and sort of say this is going to be sort of allocated per head, and that's the most equal way of doing it. But with that, sort of, you can maybe even go down to nutrition, right? Sort of how much can you actually grow? How many cows can you produce that are not sort of over emitting on methane, for example, while still recognizing that there are important sort of cultural factors linked to a lot of these different production systems. But then the types of foods that we actually want to eat, that sort of that cultural relational component that is actually so fundamental to our food system, is really difficult to get into a metric. And so I think a lot of our current configurations or governance systems are set up around things that we can actually pinpoint. So we can talk about calories, we can increasingly talk about sort of nutrition, but culturally relevant food systems, you know, how are you going to put that into a metric? And yet that's kind of at the heart of what it actually means to be eating. And so with this Nature Futures framework that we're developing as part of the IPBES Scenario and Models Task Force, we're really trying to open up a space to sort of conceptualize sort of different values that we actually, or value perspectives that we hold for nature. So we have this conception of sort of nature for society, sort of meeting societal needs. We still need to get our food from nature. We still need to get sort of fibers for our clothing, or sort of for making houses. So we still need those kind of direct instrumental values, that those benefits from nature, and we tend to have a pretty decent grip of what a sustainable sort of consumption of those might actually look like. So that's okay. But then we also understand that sort of nature, there's a nature as culture perspective. Sort of this is sort of moving into that idea of a post Descartesian dualism, which again Jason sort of refers to in his book, that sort of understands us not as separate from nature. So what are the cultural components? And we're actually struggling quite a lot to come up with some of the metrics that can actually talk to this particular value perspective for nature, because we're not very good at coming up with numbers on that. And so anyone who's interested in working with us on this, sort of, I sort of really urge you to get in touch. And then the final component is sort of recognizing the intrinsic value of nature for itself, nature as its own entity, as its own subject, not sort of as an object for humans to be able to dominate or to take control of. And, you know, we've also got some metrics for that, but they come from a particular perspective. For example, again, in conservation, like the percentage of protected areas that we have, which we kind of assume that if sort of nature is able to sort of be excluded from humans, then it's sort of doing its own thing. But we're not really sort of going into that more than human appreciation of nature as its own entity. And I think that that's where, if we can start to get some of those metrics and targets right, we'll be able to have a much more holistic sense of where it is we actually want to be going. So that's my my long-winded response to sort of this idea about metrics and targets, and also getting in a bit of the Nature Futures framework discussion there.